Good afternoon, everyone in the East, and good morning to everyone in the West. I'm Deborah Yedlin, President and CEO of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. Bonjour à tous. It's great to be joining you all today. I'm very pleased to be part of the CIB update and to moderate the panel discussion following our update this afternoon, depending on your time zone. As we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Treaty 7 territory, which comprises the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina Nations, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. We have the privilege today of joining this call from different regions across the country, and I also want to acknowledge the traditional lands on which other participants have gathered as well. As we discuss critical infrastructure in the future of Canada, it is essential that we continue to work in partnership with First Nations and carry forward with inclusivity and mutual respect in all aspects of the work we do. Canada is facing challenges not seen since the post-war era. It's something that we have not seen and are grappling with. From tariffs, economic nationalism, protectionism, disruption of global trade flows, uncertainty is the word that dominates every conversation in business, in government, across the country, and across the spectrum. Infrastructure has a critical role to play in strengthening Canada's economic productivity and competitiveness. It's at the top of the national agenda. And for the last 7 years, the CIB has been catalyzing important and meaningful infrastructure projects across the country, projects that enable economic opportunity, reconciliation, and affordability. Projects like the SMR and early works at Darlington, the Port of Prince Rupert's expansion and infrastructure to enable housing in Brandon, Manitoba. 106 investments, 89 new infrastructure projects, and more than 313,000 jobs. We stand on the brink of a transformative opportunity for our country and one that will require close collaboration and partnership between the public and private sectors, a model the CIB has helped to mature and catalyze through private investment in Canada infrastructure. I'm looking forward to today's discussion with Macky Tall, Chair of the CIB's Board of Directors, and Ehren Cory, President and CEO of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. These two leaders bring deep expertise in Canadian infrastructure financing, and I expect a thoughtful conversation on how public and private sectors can come together to drive meaningful change at a very important time in our country's history. We have a full agenda today, and in a moment, I'll turn the microphone over to Macky, who will provide an update on the CIB's most recent performance. He will then turn things over to Ehren to share more detail on new opportunities for Canadian infrastructure and the role the CIB will play as outlined in the recent federal budget. And finally, we'll open the floor for questions and hear directly from our speakers on what these developments mean for the CIB and how they see the organization evolving to meet future challenges. One quick note, we will hopefully have the opportunity to take a few questions from the audience today, so please use the Q&A box on your screen if you have a question for Ehren or Macky. And with that, I will turn things over to Macky just after a quick introduction. Macky Tall is recognized as one of Canada's leading infrastructure investors with deep expertise in financing and delivering major projects across the transportation and energy sectors. He previously served as partner and chair of Carlyle's Global Infrastructure Group and held senior leadership roles at CDPQ, including founding chair and CEO of CDPQ Infra. Thank you, Macky. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Deborah. Hello, everyone. Bonjour. It is my pleasure to be here with you today to share an update on the CIB's recent results. Infrastructure has never been more important to Canada's future. It is the foundation of our economy, and it drives sustainability and resilience. At a time when Canadians are focused on economic growth, stability, and productivity, infrastructure makes those things possible. La BIC continue de réaliser des progrès tangibles vers l'atteinte de ses objectifs en investissant dans des projets qui comptent pour la population du Canada et qui produisent des résultats réels. To date, we have committed almost $18 billion in investment, and 106 projects have reached financial close, representing a total capital cost of $54.4 billion. Of note this quarter are two new investments that will soon represent jobs more reliable energy, improved supply chains, and stronger communities. Au Nouveau-Brunswick, la modernisation de l'usine de Saint John, un investissement de 660 millions de dollars, va générer de l'énergie renouvelable et créer plus de 600 emplois dans toute la chaîne d'approvisionnement du secteur forestier, soutenant l'un des plus grands employeurs de la province. And in Alberta, the Surgeon Terminal West expansion, supported by a $100 million loan, will improve rail capacity, facilitate the movement of Canadian goods to global markets, and create up to 50 new full-time jobs. And at the same time, many of the CIB's 106 investments are coming to life in construction projects and completions across Canada. Right now, 89 projects are under construction and 8 are complete, creating over 313,000 jobs during construction and delivering an average annual GDP impact of $2.3 billion. I am excited to announce that the CIB's 9th project to achieve completion is now online. It is the Tille Solar Array in Newell, Alberta, and it is now providing renewable energy for Albertans and long-term benefits for the Alexander First Nation. It joins the recently completed Kwa Im Solar Project in British Columbia, providing clean renewable energy to more than 2,400 homes in Laka-Pamux communities and the BC grid. This partnership is enabling economic participation and supporting the community's path to financial independence. Seeing the tangible impact of our investments, I have to say, is one of the most gratifying parts of my role here on the CIB board, and I look forward to many more transformative projects. Enfin, un autre investissement récent de la BIC, dont je suis particulièrement fier en tant que Montréalais, c'est la deuxième phase du réseau du métro léger REM qui transporte maintenant les navetteurs sur 50 km et 19 stations. D'un océan à l'autre, les investissements de la BIC créent des emplois, améliorent la compétitivité énergétique et stimulent les perspectives économiques pour la population du Canada. We are really excited about what's ahead, and now I will turn it to Ehren to share some news on changes to come. Ehren, to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Macky, and thanks, Deborah, for being with us today to facilitate this conversation. The quarterly market updates that we do are always such a great chance to both reflect on our progress and give you the snapshot of where we're at, but also to look ahead, and that's what I'm going to do. But I want to start actually kind of transition by talking a bit more in depth about one of the sectors where we've made real progress, because I think it's a window into where we're going. So in the 106 projects that Macky was talking about and the $18 billion or so of CIB committed funds, one important milestone that we've reached that we're very proud of is, in total, we are now at $10 billion in clean power investment commitments. And as I said, I want to talk about this just for a second because I think it's a good window into both where we've come from but where we're going as an organization. Of course, one of the things that's notable about that milestone is it really does include projects across the country from coast to coast to coast. You can see red dots on your slides, but I would also say there are a number of other projects. For instance, we have one on a island in Hudson's Bay on the island of Santa Kilowak, which is a wind and battery storage project to help a community move off diesel. We have procurements underway, working with the authority across 4 provinces that would fill in even more dots on this map. Those projects, when they're completed, will add many more renewable projects to our grid. Nos investissements dans l'énergie propre, soutenir la participation autochtone aux infrastructures énergétiques, réduire l'impact sur les contribuables dans les communautés, and they really cover the full range of the sector, from battery storage to energy production to transmission. Interestingly, they also cover the full range of investment opportunities, from loans, so debt products, to equity investments by the CIB. We've made an equity investment in a transmission line connecting New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, the Saguenay project, which we've done in participation with energy companies and First Nations. Our clean power investments have certainly advanced economic reconciliation with Indigenous communities. Our Indigenous equity program, where we make loans to Indigenous communities so that they can buy equity stakes in the projects that are in their communities, has had a significant impact in bringing Indigenous communities along with us. So across the country, across the energy spectrum, and across the investing spectrum, I think our work in clean power really does paint the way that the CIB can play across the infrastructure landscape as we go forward. That nimbleness, that flexibility, and our ability to sort of meet the moment is, I think, reflected in and a natural link to the budget that came out in last month, where there were a number of changes for the CIB. I guess first and foremost, perhaps the headline is that the appropriation for the CIB for our investing activities was increased from $35 billion to $45 billion. That's a natural reflection of the progress that Macky spoke about, especially when you think through not only the $18 billion in investment commitments, but the pipeline of projects we have coming. And for many of those, we're already in term sheets or have clear line of sight to deals that take us well beyond $25 billion in money already committed or earmarked. So when you put that in context, increasing our appropriation really is just the next step in continuing to do the great work we're doing. Our target for Indigenous investing, which was $1 billion and which we have met, and I talked about in a previous market update, was increased in the most recent budget to $3 billion. And again, we are excited to get to and surpass that number. We believe that in many of the infrastructure projects happening in this country today, they only happen with deep partnership with, engagement with, and ultimately economic stake for Indigenous communities. So we're really excited about that. The third really notable change, and Deborah, we may talk about this in the Q&A, I think, because I know it's been a question I hear a lot when I travel the country, is the idea that the CIB will be working really closely with the recently formed Major Projects Office, the MPO, and with other federal financing tools to really double down on accelerating the progress of the projects of national interest, projects that are referred to the MPO, so that we can attract private capital to those, coordinate federal financing tools to unstick some of the largest projects that to this point have been stuck. And so I think our partnership and collaboration on those in particular is an exciting moment. And as the budget outlines, we'll really be quite sector agnostic in that work, working alongside the MPO on the projects that are referred to them. There were a few more things. There was discussion in the budget around AI infrastructure and how the CIB can play a meaningful role as we roll out revised and augmented digital and AI strategy for our country, from the clean power that's required, the broadband and digital capacity, and ultimately the compute capacity itself required to be a leading player in the AI and digital infrastructure space. And then last but certainly not least is the accelerated role for the CIB in working really closely with our colleagues at Building Canada Homes, the recently created organization, playing a leading role in getting to more housing starts and more affordable housing built in this country. The CIB is both a collaborator with them because many projects in this country are stuck for lack of infrastructure. The water and wastewater supply, for instance, that a new development would need, and so those are perfect investments for the CIB. But more broadly, we're also working with Building Canada Homes, providing advisory support and really helping them as they get fully launched and stood up. So we're excited about that as well. So a number of things, I guess I'd say in closing, that the new budget outlines, all, I think, really exciting expansion of the core mandate of the CIB, all building on the progress we've made over the last 7 years. So we're excited to continue and go even further. With that, I'll leave it, and Deborah, turn it back to you. We're really looking forward, Macky and I, to the discussion. Thank you for joining us from Calgary. We're all scattered throughout the country, but really nice to have you with us, at least virtually, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. And of course, as a journalist, I was always asking Bank of Canada governors and economists about how do we increase productivity? What do we need to do from an infrastructure standpoint? So this is definitely something that has been topical, but even more topical today. So I have a question that I'm going to start with you, Ehren, and then go to Macky. So it feels like the entire country is talking about infrastructure. It's become a topic that everybody wants to hear more about. And after 7 years of investing in infrastructure, what lessons has the CIB learned? What are the constraints that could slow projects down? How can you alleviate them to build them faster, as we know the government does want to see? And of course, how is it, is the CIB positioned in such a way that attracting capital, private capital, is something that is also starting to happen at a greater pace? So first to you, Ehren, and then to Macky.
Just starting with a small question then, are you, Deborah?
I always do.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And listen, I think Canada, by virtue of our geography and our economy, has always depended on infrastructure. That isn't new. You can't move goods or people across this country or information without our ports and our airports, our roads, our railroads. You can't have a functioning economy without great harnessing of our abundant energy, which is one of the true gifts that Canada has, from our hydro to clean and conventional sources of energy. So it's fun that infrastructure feels sort of sexy now, but I don't think this is new. I think what's new is that there is more consensus than there's ever been around what I just said, around the criticality, because you're right, we've been talking for a long time in this country about how to drive productivity. Well, that's what infrastructure is supposed to do. It is the arteries and the central nervous system to driving economic growth, to driving the kind of clean and prosperous economy and country we want to be. And I think what's changed is there's more consensus around that than ever, and more ambition around that than ever. And I think what we know is that building large projects is really hard. It requires an incredible alignment. So to your question about like what have we learned, they don't happen without incredible partnership across levels of government, partnership with local affected communities, partnerships with Indigenous communities, and partnerships with the private sector, who are often you talk about infrastructure being the economic lifeblood or being the multiplier to productivity. Well, productivity ultimately has to come from the private sector. So infrastructure really all has to come from great partnerships. What we've learned in the last 7 years is when you get that right, it is incredible how fast you can go. And my first mentor in this space said sometimes you have to figure out how to go slow to go fast, meaning how do you take that early beat? Now, it can't be years or decades, but that early beat to create the conditions for success. And that really is about partnership. And I think what we've learned at the CIB is those partnerships take such different forms. There are some infrastructure projects in this country that are really private sector led. I think of some of the things we're working on right now where, it's a company that's working on an innovative new technology or product, a sustainable aviation fuel. And what they need is just a bridge to what is, we think, ultimately an incredible business opportunity. They need a bridge because of the uncertainty in the market in your early phase, or how commercial rules are going to sort out, how regulations are going to play out in the next few years, but they just need a nudge. And for those projects, the CIB can be a wonderful source of financing when private capital alone can't quite do it. At the other end of the spectrum, you have large public projects. The Port of Prince Rupert, which you mentioned, Deborah, in your introductory comments. Yeah. Ports are public assets in this country. And so there, what we can do, though, is say, how do we crowd in some of the private capital alongside public sources of funding so that we can get the most efficient, cost-effective solutions in place. So in a place like Prince Rupert, you've got the Port Authority that's public, but you're also going to have a private terminal operator who's running operations, doing bulk loading, transloading, and shipping. And so my point is just the partnership itself changes quite a bit. Some are public-led with private sector involvement. Some are private-led with a little bit of support from the public sector. But in all cases, if you can get that partnership right between public and private, levels of government, Indigenous communities, I think that's the secret sauce. And when you marry that with the ambition we, I think, have as a country and the consensus we have, we've never been in better shape when it comes to trying to build the infrastructure we know we need for the coming decades.
Macky?
Yes, Ehren has covered it really well. As he said, infrastructure projects, they're large, they're complex, they're challenging to complete. But at the same time, those issues that slow them down often come back to the same ones. They're around the challenge in putting in place complex financing in place. They're around permitting, regulatory processes, and managing those. They are around managing specific risks, sometimes commercial, construction. They are around managing efficiently stakeholder engagement. They're around managing supply chain challenges. And as Ehren was saying, working in close partnership with the public sector, private sector, and a strategic financing tool like the CIB is critical in being able to wrestle these challenges and get to a successful project at the end of the day. And what you will see is that from one project to another, there will be one of these factors that will be a bigger problem. So it's really focusing on finding the right solutions. And that is an expertise that the CIB has developed really well over the last few years to be able to bring value and solutions to these projects.
Ehren, I liked your comment about going slow to go fast. You know, there's a saying in Latin, festina lente. You have to make haste slowly to get to where you want to go. So that reminded me of that phrase, yes. But, you know, just in terms of going fast versus going slow, what do you see as some areas for quick wins where Canada can demonstrate progress on infrastructure development? I think, you know, we've forgotten that what we have in place that you referenced, ports, railroads, roads, nothing lasts forever. And the economy's grown and we need to open new markets. And so all of a sudden we realize where we are and how we have to expand that, what we have for infrastructure. Just curious as to where you see that we see those quick wins possible.
Yeah, I would point to a few, and I think they really are about both where your question where quick wins are possible, but also like where I think by virtue of necessity, we have no choice but to go urgently. So the first of those is around trade diversification. And I think investment in our ports, our inland logistics facilities, all the way back up supply chains is going to make a difference. And this is a long-term thing. It's not about it's not only about our shifting trade relationships in the world and changes in our trade north and south, although it's partly about that. But I think it's also just about the realization that if we want to reach the levels of economic prosperity and productivity that we want to, we need to create more and more pathways for Canadian products to get to markets. What Canada has is, whether that's our agricultural industry, our critical minerals, our energy, we have stuff the world needs and wants. Yeah. And so if you don't create viable trade pathways for those things, you don't capture the full value of them. And you don't actually help meet Canada's opportunity in the world. So that's number one. I think, and you've seen it, Macky in his comments talked about our investment in the rail handling facility in the Heartland. Which is an inland logistics facility, but it's all about helping that node of companies in and around Edmonton be more economically productive, be able to get goods to market faster and cheaper, and there ultimately be more competitive. And we're working towards investments in ports across the country. Second, I mentioned some of those verticals up the supply chain, whether that's agriculture or critical minerals. And I think, so my second thing I would point out in terms of where we can see some real, I'll say, quicker wins is in the area of those supply chains. You know, when you think of what blocks those projects, it often is infrastructure. It's access, roads or rail or pipes to get from a remote location where the resource is to markets. And often infrastructure is the lifeblood of those projects. It's the make or break. And so, you know, we've got an investment, for instance, in a rare earths project in northern Quebec and Labrador, Strange Lake. It's a the initial investment is in things like the runway to get to the place, the road access. It's going to need power eventually. And so I think a number of those projects are places where, given geopolitics and given what's happening in the world, I think the urgency of building Canadian strong supply chains in those areas mean that we're going to really go fast. And then the third thing I'd say is in the north. And it's been a big topic of conversation for a while now, but never as loud and urgent as today. Building what I would think dual use infrastructure, so could include ports and roads, could be both for economic value, so think about critical minerals in the north and getting them to ports, maybe ports that we don't even have yet on the north coast, like a Grays Bay in western Nunavut, to pick an example. Building that infrastructure both to drive economic productivity in the north, but also to really redefine and rethink what sovereignty looks like in the north and how do we provide security of the Northwest Passage and our sovereignty in the north. So I think those three areas I would point out to you that I think are going, just given the urgency of the moment, have no choice but to go at light speed.
You know, I just sort of going to take that conversation a little bit further. So, and I'll start with Macky on this one. So, you know, we've seen projects that have been heralded one day, they've fallen the wayside later for various reasons. But you have a long history in this space. And now we've seen that the federal government has passed both Bill C5 and established the Major Projects Office. How do you see both of those pieces changing the processes and the outcomes? And then where does the role of the CIB in making sure that all of, you know, both the legislation and the Major Projects Office can actually realize the mandates that are being put forward from an infrastructure standpoint? And then I'll go to you afterwards, Ehren.
Well, clearly, Deborah, as you mentioned, it is important for us as a country to build these important projects more efficiently, faster. And both C5 and the Major Project Office have been put in place exactly for that objective. Ehren and I were mentioning earlier some of the challenges to your question that slow down the execution of these projects. And C5, you know, clearly has an objective to, among other things, streamline, simplify the permitting process. There are multiple layers of permitting process, environmental process, each of these projects has to go through, and increased coordination among all of the various parties emitting permits at various levels of government is critical to be able to be more efficient in these processes. Ehren was talking earlier about really the importance of partnership between the public and private investors. And again, they're bringing the best financial solutions to the table is again critical. And the MPO is playing a key role, and the CIB is working closely with the MPO in that objective. But I will pass it on to Ehren, who can talk very concretely about some of the things that are happening every day in that collaboration.
Yeah, I think what's exciting, Deborah, is firstly, one of the things that I think you've probably heard, Deborah, certainly I hear it, and you talk to people in this space as well, is there's an underlying question sometimes, which is great that we're going to focus on the project of national importance, the 11 or so that I guess have been named so far, but what about everything else? So I actually want to start, I'll come back to the MPO, but let me talk about the everything else just for a second, because it's often the flip side to the question about the major projects. I think what's clear, as I said in my comments, is we need to build more faster. Period, full stop. It's not about 11 projects on a list or 15 or 27. It's about, as a country, how do we unstick things? And I think what's really exciting to us, and we have a role to play in that. We're one tool in that toolbox, but I think the government of Canada is really thinking about how do you create an environment where projects can move at pace, whether that's about how do you streamline approvals or work more closely with provinces to make those happen in ways that have been more challenging. How do you make sure that all projects can go at speed? And I think I don't want to lose that. And as the CIB, obviously our role is to work across the project spectrum. And there are many projects in this country that we're supporting that I think have wind in their sails as the government creates a different environment for projects. When it comes to the major projects in particular, I think that's where the MPO is playing this unique facilitator role, where in addition to trying to streamline approvals across all projects, in addition to things that are being done across the landscape, what the MPO can do for those projects that are often, and they have a set of criteria, but they are transformational for the country. They're multi-jurisdictional often. They might go across provincial or territorial boundaries. They drive significant value. They have significant Indigenous engagement. So for that set of projects, I guess the most largest, impactful, and complex of them, having a dedicated, focused group, that is the MPO, whose job is to help, on the one hand, understand what's bottlenecking the project. Is it a regulatory or approval problem? Is it a financing question? Is it a stakeholder engagement challenge? Really getting deep into what is and has been blocking the project, I think is valuable for the government to do. And that's the first thing I think the MPO is doing, is just starting from that first principles. Why is the project stuck? And then trying to coordinate solutions. So if the problem is financing, coordinating solutions means talking with us, or it could be EDC or the Growth Fund, about whether the project matches our criteria, whether it's something we can invest in, and doing that in a collaborative, open way. So we're seeing that, and as Macky said, we're seeing that on whether it's Darlington, where we already had an investment, and the Growth Fund has now also invested money, and so is the province of Ontario, with the MPO really helping to glue all that and knit all that together. Or a place like the Port of Contrecoeur, the Port of Montreal, where the CIB is working closely with the port and with the Major Projects Office to understand how best to finance and advance that critical piece of infrastructure. We've been working really closely, and I think that coordinating role that they're playing, understanding the bottleneck and then helping to bring the right tools, whether that's financing or other, to the table is what it's added. And it's been, for us so far, just really exciting, because those projects are the ones that have often been stuck for the longest.
So one of the things I wanted to sort of talk about is how the recent budget signaled a mandate expansion for the CIB. You alluded to it in your comments, and an increase in your allocation to $45 billion. The CIB now has a sector agnostic mandate, whereas before it was not sector agnostic. And just really wanting to understand, that means you can invest and look at energy projects that are energy related. That wasn't possible before, other than renewables. Are there any that you are currently evaluating, and could the CIB have a role in the Pathways Plus carbon capture project?
Right, so great question. So yeah, as you say, so the way it's worded is 4 projects that are referred to the Major Projects Office, so that are identified as projects that are of that importance. The CIB should evaluate and has the opportunity to invest in them. And as you say, that is sector agnostic on the major projects. I think that's simply a recognition that many of these projects also don't fit neatly in one sector, do they? Like you talk about something that's carbon capture, that has technology at site to capture, it has pipelines to move, you need sequestration, and then on the other side of the bargain, you also have pipelines to move new product to market. And so I think that it's just a recognition that the CIB needs the flexibility. If we are going to be an effective tool for government, we need the flexibility to support whatever projects that the government deems are in the national interest. That's what that change is about. to your specific question, yeah, I think it'll still be our job on every project, Deborah, to answer a few core questions. The first one is, why does the project need the CIB? Does the infrastructure actually, is there a gap? Is there a role that we should be playing? Because as I say, if infrastructure is fully financeable in the private markets, you don't need us. And none of us as Canadians would want us there. I think we should let the private sector do what it does, and we should use taxpayers' money, which is what the CIB, what we're investing. We should invest it in projects that face real challenges that the markets can't quite bear. And as I said, those really fall in a few buckets. And Macky talked about some of these. It's really a commercial type of risk, like market uptake or demand. Your infrastructure has that build it and they will come challenge sometimes, where you're building and you can't do a little pilot and test it and then go a bit bigger. When you're building a new piece of infrastructure, you often have to build it at scale, and then demand is going to come, and that's uncertain. So that's the kind of gap we can fill. Or it could be a cost overrun or construction type of challenge, large projects spread out across our country in very uncertain environments. So it might be around that. Or it could be something around how commercial negotiations are going to go around an asset or something like that. So those gaps or risks that we can help fill, we now look at. It's still our job to look at them. And if a piece of infrastructure on that major projects list needs support in those areas, commercial, technological, or cost related, then that's the gap that the CIB can and should fill.
Can you just take yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, what I was going to add to Ehren's good comments there is the fact that since its inception, the CIB's investment process has really matured. I was saying earlier, 106 investments. So the whole process of analyzing investment opportunities, assessing that gap, assessing the value of the CIB's investment, assessing the impact that that project will be having, whether it's on the economy, on trade, on commerce, on the environment, on greenhouse gas. It's a very well laid out process that we work very closely with Ehren and the team at the board level to really evaluate and execute. And that's how the CIB has been able to have that impact on so many projects so far.
One of the funniest things, Macky, that we talk about as management and the board, and today, Deborah, this is a great example of it. We started by talking about our results, and you think about how many investments we've made and how much dollars we've deployed across the country, which we're proud of. But when we look at an individual investment, the actual question we ask ourselves is, what's the least amount of money for the least amount of time that we can put into this project? We're quite different than other investors on this, right? So if other investors found an attractive investment, their job will be to put lots of money into it and make great returns. Since we measure our returns not just financially, but also through the exact outcomes Macky was describing, for us, an investment where we put $1 in, and that is the difference between the project not happening and happening, and the trade not happening or happening, or the GHG benefits not happening or happening, that is our best investment. So we have this interesting, our job really is to figure out what's the least amount of money we can put in to make a thing happen. And sometimes that's half the total capital in a project. But sometimes it's 10 or 20% where we're taking just the risk it requires to make the project happen. And that's what we have to ask ourselves on every project.
Well, you're obviously playing a really important role from a de-risking standpoint to crowd in private capital. I mean, that's sort of, when you look at it from that context. But, let's just think about Alberta a bit more specifically, because this is a place where you have made a fair number of investments. And what other opportunities do you see here now? What role could you play in some of the infrastructure conversations that we're having, whether it's pipelines, whether it's SMRs, electricity, this idea of interties between BC and Alberta? I'm really curious to see where the opportunities are going forward.
Great. Well, first, I'll just say that you're right. Alberta has been very fertile or productive ground for the CIB. I think we've had great, and I back to my earlier comments of what makes it work. We have built, and we have a team in Calgary, Deborah, as you know, we have an office in Calgary who are worked really hard to build good relationships with the energy sector, with Indigenous nations across the province of Alberta, with the government of Alberta. And so through those relationships, we have a great track record, and a track record that's really diverse. And I'm telling you this to answer the second part of your question, because we have an investment in, broadband in 24 rural communities in northern Alberta. We have an investment in irrigation infrastructure across the province, largely concentrated in the south, to help farmers increase yields and grow productivity and drive growth in their businesses, which is a fantastic investment. We have a whole bunch of investments in renewables projects, entirely in partnership with First Nations. Macky was talking about Tilly Solar in his comments, and we have other projects with the Chiniki and Goodstony. We have investments with the Enoch Cree Nation just outside Edmonton to build housing and create development land on their reserve. So it's just a really interesting and diverse portfolio so far. When I look ahead, I think obviously the place, and I think we'll continue to have progress in all of those areas, by the way. We're also working, I'm missing some things. We're working on trade corridors, which we've been working with the government on for a while, about creating, whether that's a trade corridor type of infrastructure over to Churchill or to the west, we've been working on for a while. But I think as you look forward, you can't help but say that some of that opportunity is going to be in the projects that are on everybody's mind, which are the large energy projects. And so we're having conversations already. We've been engaged with Pathways Alliance and for several years now on what I think would be a truly transformative project. And so those, I think there's no doubt those conversations are going to pick up pace given the events of the last couple of weeks. And we're really excited about that. And we've also been talking, there's an LNG project, the Silisms project, that's identified. So we've been meeting with them to give another example to better understand that project and what the risks it face are and whether there's any appropriate role for the CIB. So I just give those as a couple of examples that are, I think, well known and in the public domain. We're having lots of conversations. That's our job. But some of those, I have no doubt, are going to only go even faster now as those projects are on that project of national importance list and are going to get the full all of government push.
You know, I just, one of the topics of conversation is in Alberta is also around rail, but also we have a green line that's being built in Calgary. Macky, the REM was recently completed in Montreal, and it's the first private sector-led transit project in North America. So how is this a model that works? Can it be applied to other jurisdictions and in other sectors? Is there anything you could speak to in terms of how that project evolves, lessons that could be applied? What do we need to think about it in the Alberta context? Because we do hear about, the Calgary Banff Rail, which was submitted to the Major Projects Office last week. We talk about Edmonton, Calgary. We are trying to move forward on our Green Line, which is under construction. So really interested in the REM and how that applies.
Well, Deborah, let me start by saying that, yes, it's a model that works because it has delivered for Quebec and for Montreal the largest public transit system built in over 50 years. That was long in the wait. It was also a very good example of the successful partnerships that need to come together that Ehren was mentioning. The CIB, it was its first investment. But it's a combination with public sector, CIB, private sector investment. And what's unique with the RAM model is that CDPQ Infra leads, as you were saying, the whole complete step of the process from design, development, construction, and long-term operation and maintenance. But it does it working very closely in partnership with the province of Quebec. And what CDPQ Infra brings is a world-class expertise of having been involved with major transit projects around the world. So it brings that top-of-the-line expertise. It brings resources, both in terms of technical expertise, but also meaningful financial means to do that. And where the partnership works well is that the province plays the role of ensuring that the project is developed and designed, meeting public goals, public objectives, and the public interest. And so this is a project that has been delivered at a very fast pace compared to similar projects around the world. And Bloomberg has published a study that shows that its cost is meaningfully lower than comparable projects of comparable size that have been built across major cities in North America. So yes, it works. And I think that it's a good example of leveraging successfully a partnership, complementary one, where the private sector working closely with the public sector becomes additive in the sense that more of these major infrastructure projects that are needed happen. So I do think that, in the right case with the right private partner, that is a model that should be explored and could bring some solutions to Alberta.
Well, we're certainly looking, I know that everybody's looking for solutions, so I'm sure this will be a model that will be closely looked at. There's a question that's come in from one of our participants, and it's either for Macky or for Ehren. Given the economic stabilization we've seen through 2025, how has the risk appetite of institutional investors evolved compared to last year? And specifically, are you seeing a shift in the types of concessionary financing structures required to bring private partners to the table, especially for large-scale energy transition and battery storage projects?
Macky, why don't you go ahead? You know that space very well.
Yes, what I would say is that the investment appetite does move from cycle to cycle, but the appetite for investors, for institutional investors, for pension funds remain meaningful to invest in infrastructure projects. And so if you're a project sponsor, as Ehren was mentioning earlier, the CIB, many of these projects can happen purely on a commercial basis with private capital. And, we come in to bridge a gap. But in a lot of cases, you will be able to find multiple sources of equity investment from private equity funds, from pension funds, from life insurance companies, from institutional investors. Similarly, and that remains the case today, where an increased number of investors have allocation to the asset class, and they have an appetite to deploy that money. And same is the case on the debt financing side, from private credit to banks, to capital markets, and bond financing, in particular post-construction, that can provide you with very competitive financing. So that capital is available, it's abundant. In many cases, it's making sure that the projects are structured optimally for them to happen. And yes, in some cases, there is a need for a strategic financing, an innovative structure, whether debt or equity, that the CIB and others can bring also. But that remains very, very meaningful and available in the financial markets today.
I would just say my view of it, Deborah, which Macky can correct me, he knows better than I, but I would just take the view that there was a point in time when institutional investors saw infrastructure a little bit as a unicorn. It offered high single-digit returns for something close to government risk. They loved it. And if you could do that, you'd do that. And so and our pension funds, some of our institutional investors, who are among the best in the world, were more than happy to own mature, cash flow generating infrastructure projects around the world. What was not so much on their radar was investing in building new greenfield infrastructure and the risks that come with it. And I think over the last, 5 to 10 years, that's changed a lot for two reasons. One, there aren't as many of those in classic buy high cash flow, very stable currency and risk adjusted kind of there just aren't as many of them, or the ones that are the premiums gotten bid down. So I just don't know that those opportunities exist as much anymore, number one. But number two, I think many of the institutional investors have gotten much more sophisticated in saying, yes, sure, we still love that. We'd still love to own a mature operating asset, a transmission business, a port, whatever. But we also can think about all the ways to play in infrastructure, which goes both directions. On the one hand, like Macky said, on the debt and credit side, they're much more involved than they used to be. And at the other end, on the higher return, higher risk, almost like a private equity type of investment where they truly are taking business risk, and they're doing it eyes wide open, they're doing more of that. So I just think they've expanded their their lens a lot from what they used to search for was this. They've gotten much better at playing across the whole spectrum. And so I think we're going to see more than ever institutional investors wanting to and being part of the solution as we go forward.
One of the things we often,
sorry, that's Ehren is spot on how the appetite has evolved, in particular around construction. And one thing he was mentioning also that we have the luxury of having in Canada is that we have some fairly sophisticated investors. Our pension funds understand infrastructure well. They have progressed in the way that Ehren was describing. And so that's an advantage. We have to have that capital and those investors that have evolved in the ways described it well. And if you allow me, Deborah, I'll take the opportunity to also outline some good recent news, which was that Ehren's mandate as CEO of the CIB was very recently renewed. And we're really lucky to have somebody's quality expertise leading the CIB. He has done so, leading the team with great success in the last few years, bringing significant, he had been CEO since 2020, bringing meaningful experience, among other things, as having been the CEO of Infrastructure Ontario, where he had already led billions of investments. So it's really, yes, we have the pension funds, but we also have Ehren in this country leading the CIB for us.
Well, congratulations on the renewal, Ehren. I just wanted to sort of add to your responses. That one of the things we hear about in the context of needing to build and attract private capital, we need patient capital. And how has that mindset changed in terms of patient capital coming to Canada and to fund these projects? Because we've seen a decrease in the amount of money that has been coming into the country from that category. Just curious as to how you see that shifting. Either of you, if you want to answer.
Macky, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, look, I think that that's a critical part of it. The amount of capital that we will need to invest in all the important sectors of infrastructure is huge. It is beyond what public sector can provide. So yes, our private institutions, our pension fund will invest, but we have to have that goal to also attract more of that FDI and that capital on the attractive quality projects. So from that perspective, you're right that those investments have decreased. You may tie them to some of the current geopolitical situation and uncertainty it has created. But all the efforts we are doing to structure our infrastructure projects in Canada so that they're attractive will help steer more of that capital. But Deborah, it's an important point, and it's a priority we have to attract more of that foreign capital into our country.
Thank you. Ehren, did you want to add to that at all, or no?
No.
I wanted to, you talked about equity investments as being on the agenda. So I'm curious as to how you see it working, but also tying that into the Indigenous communities that are really playing a role in advancing major projects. And just curious as to how you see the equity opportunity differing or adding to the Indigenous loan guarantee programs, whether that's federal or provincial, that are already in place, and how that all, how does it all work together, and what would you advise project proponents to consider?
Yeah, as you say, so I mentioned in my remarks, the CIB does have the capacity to invest across the capital stack in a project. So we can be debt, we can be equity. Usually what we are is a hybrid right in between. It's some form of subordinated debt or debt with equity-like features. So for example, if we make a loan, but we say we'll only be repaid once your revenue from the asset exceeds blank, or it becomes profitable, or so oftentimes it may be loan-like, but it's also tied very much to the performance of the asset, which is kind of what equity is. So most of our investments are in that hybrid sort of category. We have, so to answer your question, as we go forward, I think that sharing in the risks of equity. So whether our investment is a loan or equity, but sharing in that commercial risk alongside equity is going to be super important to catalyzing the types of projects we're talking about, because for many of them, their biggest challenge is commercial. It's the offtake or ramp up of demand. It's pricing, like if you're doing a alternate fuel to export to displace natural gas in Europe, I don't know, a biomethanol facility or something, you're going to have pretty significant, or critical minerals, to pick a different example. Right. The markets of those are quite volatile right now. We're still in the early days. And so that commercial risk is the thing that is often in the way of those projects. So I think for the CIB, continuing to build our capabilities in that space, when we go to talk to our board about those investments, our board, made up of people like Macky, although we have a public mission, we act in all other ways like a private investor, with the discipline of diligence and what are the risks we are taking, and have we done our proper homework? Do we know what we're getting into? That sort of thing. So I think that's going to be even more important. And certainly at the CIB, we're thinking about, do we have the right mix of people, the right advisors that help us out on those investments, because we are taking meaningful commercial risk, and I think we'll take even more. And I think as we go forward, you'll start to see us do even more of them as actual equity, not just equity-like. And I think that's true because for many of them, that's the way to best create alignment between the CIB and our commercial partners. So I think that'll continue to be really important. But at the same time, and this to the second half of your question, one of the things the CIB started doing 2 years ago that we think has been a real game changer has been lending money to Indigenous communities to support their equity investments in projects, what we call our IEI, or Indigenous Equity Investing Program. And so we do that so that Indigenous communities have economic stakes in projects, but also they have voice or seats at the table in projects. Yeah. And I think it's really important. What we're seeing now, Deborah, in many places, AIOC in Alberta would be a great example of this, where partnering together, we can come up with a solution that provides the Indigenous community with the money to buy into a true equity stake in the project, to do it early enough that they have a voice. Like some of the loan guarantee programs, if they're only allowing Indigenous communities to buy in post-construction, the thing's now built and operating, they get a cash flow stream out of that. So that's, Indigenous communities appreciate that, but they aren't in the project from the outset. So a combination of a loan from us and a loan guarantee, we're starting to see that across the country. And as I say, many provinces now, Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, many have or are working on some form of loan guarantee program, and of course at the federal level. So we think that those are all natural co-conspirators or partners of ours, where we can structure an investment with a tranche of money from the CIB and a loan guarantee in ways that really give Indigenous communities meaningful stakes early in projects, where they can help shape the project, have a voice in the project, and reap the rewards of the project.
Well, I want to thank you for that answer, and I want to thank everybody for tuning into this this panel conversation. It's been interesting. I'm sure we could go on for a bit longer, but I really want to thank you, Ehren and Macky, and also thank you both for allowing me to facilitate this conversation. And I wish you a happy holiday season, and we look forward to what the CIBC is going to be doing in 2026.
Deborah, you made it all the way till the end without calling us CIBC. You were so close. It happens once a day. They're our friends too, and they're our collaborators, lots of stuff too. But yeah, we're really excited about what the new year holds. Thank you to you for joining us for this. We really appreciate the Chamber. Yours, chambers like yours across the country have been great partners of ours. We look forward to the collaboration. Next time we'll do this in person, perhaps in Calgary.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. And thanks everyone who has joined us for this. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Au revoir.